Great to be with you. This is the first event I've done anything like this since March 13th, 2020. So it's great to be with a more normal, something I used to do quite often, a couple times a month perhaps. So it's a little surreal to be back in a group setting like this, but great to be with you. Special shout out to Pat Walker. So Pat, just because Pat and I have known each other for so long, Pat was actually a client in one of my first businesses, Publishing Solutions, that I founded in 1988. So it's fun to see Pat here, but there's also a handful of friends in the room. So it's great to be alive and engaged this morning. So, the title of this conversation is Staying Innovative with Dwindling Resources and Dwindling or Uncertain Resources. And certainly that's a great framing for the work that Jumpstart does and has historically done. And so I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the Jumpstart story. So I thought perhaps I'd spend the first 5 minutes or so talking about who Jumpstart is, what we're about, what role we're asked to play in the community, how that role has evolved over time. Because certainly our role in the founding of Jumpstart, it was really all around the, whether you call it the valley of death or the fundamental issues and challenges related to entrepreneurship, particularly in Northeast Ohio. So earlier this morning, I described Jumpstart. We're 17 years old. I'm the founder of it. I never expected to still be here 17 years later. Let alone Jumpstart necessarily still being in business 17 years later, at least the way that it is today. So maybe I'll talk a little bit about our founding story, and then I describe us as being in our 6th chapter as an organization, because like a lot of things in life, the more you work on a particular problem, you realize the additional complexities, and you evolve and change. The word pivot is obviously overused these days. Jumpstart is constantly pivoting, while at the same time fundamentally anchored to where the market is broken, which is in a very, very painful place to be sometimes in a capitalist society. As a nonprofit economic development entity, you don't want to work in where things are easy. You want to work where things are the hardest, because you're not there to maximize profits. You're there to solve problems that the market itself, for whatever reason, isn't solving. That's kind of the fundamental role of Jumpstart, and continues to be that way. So let me tell you a little bit of that story. I'll try not to be too extended in the comments, but hopefully it'll provide context on this in the scenario of kind of dwindling resources. So how do you tell 17 years in 10 minutes? I'll try to go fast. Hopefully it's clear. In the early 2000s, Northeast Ohio, as a regional economy, was the worst performing large region in the United States. So we had the lowest number of startup companies, the least amount of venture capital, the lowest amount of job growth. And one of my passions in life is history, and I could talk for an hour about exactly why Northeast Ohio was that way in 2000, 2002. But long story short, the iconic companies built in Northeast Ohio from 1870 to 1940 had played their cards, and it was time to completely reset the deck. Whether I'm from Akron, so all the global tire companies, the TRWs, the 28 Fortune 500 companies in Cleveland in 1985, of which we have 6 today, we were running right into the headwinds of we need to recreate this economy. And obviously, Goodyear and TRW and Lubrizol and Swagelok were all startups at one point, but they certainly weren't startups by the year 2000. So the focus almost 20 years ago, or basically 20 years ago, is we've got to recreate our economy in Northeast Ohio with young companies. But I would also say, and I was an entrepreneur, grew up in Akron, started and sold 4 companies. Entrepreneurship in 2000 in Northeast Ohio, I would describe as kind of a 4-letter or dirty word. If you were an entrepreneur, other than maybe running a family business, if you were an entrepreneur, and I would say probably for the, from 1900 to probably 1970 or 1980, why would you be an entrepreneur when you could go work for a global company and have an incredible career and take no risk? Because all the number of incredible companies in Northeast Ohio. So if you went to high school, yeah, maybe you'd work for a large company. But if you went to college, you didn't really need to take any risk and have an incredible career if you lived in Northeast Ohio. Well, when that ultimately kind of plays out, so then we get to 2000, early 2000s, 2002, and at the same time we're looking over at Pittsburgh, and Pittsburgh is really doing well with startups and innovation. And so the leaders in Cleveland and Governor Taft at the time in Columbus basically said, we got to figure this out because, Northeast Ohio in particular, but Ohio in general is not competitive. We're not as competitive as we'd like to be. So let's create a new initiative called the Ohio Third Frontier that would stimulate public, private, and philanthropic partnerships focused on tech startups. So that was founded in 2002, 2003, and the CEOs in Cleveland principally were the catalyst to let's create a new entity or a new set of energy and collaboration that would mimic what was happening in Pittsburgh. There was an organization there, still there today, called Innovation Works that was 20 years old in 2002, and it had made a really significant impact on the economy of Southwest Pennsylvania, and basically leaders in Cleveland wanted to mimic that. So I came on the scene in 2003, didn't really know anything about nonprofits or economic development, knew a lot about entrepreneurship, had been an entrepreneur in Akron and Chicago and Boston, and had been away for some time and came back. And so I ended up finding myself volunteering with the business leadership in Northeast Ohio, again, Cleveland principally, but and at that time, regionalism was a really critical area of focus. So when we said, let's do this in our region, that's 21 counties, Ashtabula, East Liverpool, Bucyrus to Sandusky. So yes, Cleveland is the queen city or the key city, but of course Akron and Canton and Lorain and Youngstown and Mentor and lots of big cities in that community, but that was kind of the regional orientation. So Jumpstart gets founded in 2004, and it's actually a merger of 5 separate nonprofits. So like when I first came to town, I did something that I had no clue is miraculous, and that's merge 5 nonprofits. Merging 5 nonprofits, you can climb Kilimanjaro and it's easier than merging 5 nonprofits because the constituents of nonprofits is now I know. I didn't know it then. Ignorance is bliss sometimes. And I think what that was indicative of is the community was really ready to change. There was a lot of energy. They're like, hey, let's do better. Let's figure out a way to do this. And so Jumpstart was formed with an entity that was at Case called Enterprise Development, Inc., being the most important entity at the Weatherhead School at Case. But there was 5 other initiatives and organizations that merged to form Jumpstart. And Jumpstart's founding focus really was to make Northeast Ohio a center for technology, innovation, and venture capital, or let's say economically competitive, similar to what Pittsburgh had done. So the construct was, hey, unless you're the niece, nephew, son, daughter, godchild of a CEO in town, you're not going to raise $500,000 from, don't need it? Oh, this isn't on? Do I need it? Okay. So unless you're a relative of a CEO in town, do you need, are you going to be able to raise $500,000 for your startup? No. There isn't no one in Cleveland that's going to invest $500,000, or at least not an entity that's going to do it 12 times a year. So Jumpstart was founded to be that seed investor that would invest in 10, 12, 14 companies a year at the seed stage and be willing to invest $250,000 to $750,000 per company. That didn't exist in Cleveland, Northeast Ohio, or frankly, even Ohio at the time. So that was Jumpstart's initial focus. So we basically coached. We started with a team of 16 people, which is a lot of people for a startup or for a startup nonprofit. And our focus was engaging with, coaching hundreds of tech startups across Northeast Ohio and investing in a dozen a year. So for the first handful of years, let's say 2004 to 2008, that's what we did and started to make a lot of progress. So we were investing in companies that no one else would touch.
So why tech? I was there and I remember.
Yeah, why tech?
What was the thought?
Yeah, the thought with that, it's a great question, is that is the area of focus in economic development that'll generate the greatest amount of resources and ultimately job growth. And of course, it was also very unique. You had COSI, you had other organizations in the community that were focused on small business, but there was no one focused on tech. And it is true, I mean, as an example, not that it correlates to jobs, immediately to jobs per se, but the $34 million we invested in the first 6-7 years leveraged over $1 billion of private investment. So we knew that the little dollars we were investing were just going to position the companies to be able to raise a lot more money after us. We weren't, the largest check we wrote probably in the first 8 years of the business was $800,000. Well, $800,000 is not going to get a company very far, but if you don't have any other way, if you don't have any other resources, it is a foundation to kind of get your product market fit, get your first customer, maybe hire a salesperson or two, or just kind of get the thing going. And most of the companies that we were investing in had less than 4 employees. Most had 0 revenue. Many of them did not have product market fit yet. I mean, so this is really, 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 really early, very high risk investing. But ironically, believe it or not, in the first 6-7 years of Jumpstart, we invested $11 million at the seed stage, and those investments have returned $67 million to Jumpstart. So the scenario of investing in super high risk, no one in their right minds might want to invest in these companies if you're looking to make money on this individual company. If you do it across a broad mix of companies, the law of large numbers comes into effect, and you have a portfolio, right? So, out of the first 67 companies Jumpstart invested in, we've had liquidity events in 25 of them. We wouldn't have known which of the 67 was going to generate the returns, but if you're doing that enough at a certain, at a high enough scale, you have the ability to make progress and to not only generate economic development and job creation, but ultimately do it in a way that can generate returns. And with those returns, Jumpstart has invested even more money and done even more in the community and is giving away millions of dollars on an annual basis to economic development and workforce development organizations today. But of course, that didn't start till like 8 to 10 years into the existence of the business model, because that's how long it takes to generate returns. So chapter 1 was really, we've got a problem, let's create a new organization, we're going to merge these things, and we kind of get started. And I chose 2008 because or 2009, we're going right into the downturn. And also at that time, the second chapter of Jumpstart kicked off where the state of Ohio, which used to fund things all directly to dozens of organizations, decided we only want to fund one entity and have that entity fund everybody else. And that ended up being Jumpstart. So it used to be, and of course, a lot of time has passed now. It's been 14 years, so some things have evolved. But for things like the Youngstown Business Incubator or Magnet or what's now called Bounce, the Akron Global Business Accelerator, or BioEnterprise, or all the economic development organizations related to technology and innovation, they used to all have a relationship with the state of Ohio. And in 2009, the state said, we want the region to pick one organization that is going to manage all the relationships in the community. That originally wasn't Jumpstart, but after a year of another organization trying to do it, they came to us and said, hey, Jumpstart, could you kind of take this over? So now Jumpstart is not only a coach and an investor in tech startups, but we're also now what is called, I didn't even know what it was called at the time, an intermediary, a nonprofit intermediary. So the state of Ohio or the Rockefeller Foundation or the Ford Foundation or the feds want to do something in Northeast Ohio, but they don't want 15 relationships. They want one neck to strangle. That was ours. And so now Jumpstart's been doing that at scale for the last 15 years. Or what does it end up being? I guess it's 13 years, where we've played a really significant intermediary role. So every 1 to 3 years, the Third Frontier is still around. It still has over 100 million left. When entities across, and now Jumpstart has that role also in Northwest Ohio. So we're responsible for the entrepreneurial tech ecosystem, at least the state support for that tech ecosystem on the services side for all of Northern Ohio. So 5.5 million people And and on Northwest Ohio, it's University of Toledo and ProMedica and Bowling Green State University and the Urban League over there. And so we're this ecosystem builder on the nonprofit side. Chapter 3 of Jumpstart is really relevant to our evolution because and the founding, because what started to happen that catalyzed chapter 3 of Jumpstart's existence is, first, I was asked to serve on the Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship, or the National Advisory Council for Innovation and Entrepreneurship to President Obama. And I was asked to join the board of the National Venture Capital Association. And so what that allowed me to do is kind of lift my head up and look across the country and realize, wow, the stuff that Jumpstart and our partners are doing in Northeast Ohio are quite unique and very powerful, and particularly powerful to help urban, non-tech small businesses led by Black, Hispanic, and female entrepreneurs. I would say I had a bias, and folks at Jumpstart had a bias to say, well, the curriculum and the coaching and all the things that we do are really built to help tech entrepreneurs. And what we came to learn by traveling all over the country and seeing different organizations is that the things that we'd built for tech entrepreneurs were as relevant, if not more relevant, for non-tech entrepreneurs. Why? Because the non-tech entrepreneurs would actually do the work. Tech entrepreneurs wouldn't do the work, oftentimes. So they're thinking about a cure for cancer, or they're thinking about a new form of energy, or they're thinking about some software solution. They're not interested in the blocking and tackling of how to build an early stage business. They're trying to, they're shooting for the moon. And typically when we're investing, or we have been investing, particularly at that time, the teams were really small. It really wasn't a business yet in the classic sense. So starting in 2013, 2014, Jumpstart started to work with small businesses, particularly in poor neighborhoods. Another reason why we chose to do that was we were generating returns from our tech investing, and we're headquartered in Cleveland, and we're asking ourselves, what are the odds that we're going to invest in a Google or a Microsoft or an Amazon, or pick your high-flying startup that's going to create tens of thousands of spillover jobs? If we thought we could find a tech company and invest in that company and it would just transform Cleveland's economy, then that's what we'd do. But we felt, being realistic, the odds of picking a 2, 3, 4-person tech company that's going to do that, the odds of that are 0. So when you start generating returns, when you invest $1 million in a tech company and it returns $15 million to Jumpstart, should we pour all $15 million only in tech companies? We're an economic development organization. We're here to benefit economic opportunity for everyone that lives in our community. So we made a decision, let's start working with small businesses too. Now, still the majority of our resources go to tech companies because that was our founding purpose. But we started to work with more small businesses, and as we started to do that, those businesses started to generate significant outcomes. So as an example, in 2016, the 64 small businesses in Cuyahoga County that we worked intensively with created 880 jobs. We're like, that's not possible. That you can go to a lawn care company on the east side of Cleveland, that there's a founder who has a GED and 1 employee, and you can help him gain a city contract and he can hire 35 people from the neighborhood. I didn't think that was possible. But it is possible, and that is what Jumpstart has been doing and continues to do today. Of course, COVID's been crazy, so I'll talk a little bit about COVID. But the chapter 4 of Jumpstart was, okay, Jumpstart's doing this not only in tech, they're working with entrepreneurs in tech and small business, they're running they're playing this intermediary role in tech, so now funders started to come to us to play the intermediary role in small business. Because so as an example, on the tech side, YBI, Youngstown Business Incubator, America Makes, additive manufacturing. So Jumpstart is basically a conduit of money for YBI. And if YBI has an issue or challenge on running the YBI business, or one of their portfolio companies has, Jumpstart's there to help them. Like, we do all the data tracking, all the surveying of customers. We're like the back office for a lot of YBI's work, and they may have a portfolio company. Today Jumpstart has 75 employees. We started at 16, we're at 75 now. So we can tackle dozens of big problems every day with the companies that we work with, because I never imagined we'd be 75 people. But that's how it's evolved and grown over time. So one of the things to circle back to talk about, because this is a really important element for us going forward. So from 2004 to 2020, Jumpstart ultimately has invested $70 million in tech startups. 50 million of that has been through what we call our Evergreen Fund. That is a fund that we've been able to raise at 1 million, 3 million, 5 million a year for 15, 17 years. And we've raised it in such a way that we don't have any what are called limited partners or general partners. So if the three of us started a venture fund and it was a $100 million fund and we invested the money and it returned 200 million, the first 100 million goes to the people who gave us the money. Those are our limited partners. We're the general partners. There's 100 million in profit. We get 20 million and we give 80 million to the people who gave us the money. So it's an 80-20 split when you get profitable. With Jumpstart's first 50 million, there are no limited partners. And I don't get a dime. I'm not a general partner at Jumpstart, nor is anyone else at Jumpstart a general partner. So when I say we invested 11 million from 2004 to 2011 and it generated 66 million in returns, first, we're a 501c3. We don't pay taxes. And two, there are no distributions. So with that 66 million, we can continue to do more, grow more, invest more. So that was 50 million. 4 years ago, we also raised a $20 million for-profit fund. So why would Jumpstart as a nonprofit raise a for-profit fund? Well, we started to have people in the market who wanted to invest with us, typically after our money. Like no one wants to invest when we're putting in $250 to $750, because this is a science project with 3 people. But after that, when they're raising their $5 million Series A round and they know their customer and they have $2 million in revenue and they have 14 people, and like Jumpstart had no money to invest at that stage. And others in the community said, well, Jumpstart knows these companies. Why, we ultimately decided let's raise a $20 million fund that would allow Jumpstart and our private sector investors to invest at Series A when the company is like, it's solved a lot of its problems. So we've invested 70 million to date. And as of today, we now have a new 70 million that we're just beginning to invest right now. And it's inverted. We're raising a $50 million for-profit fund today. And we've redeployed 20 million of our own house money. Remember I talked about the 11 to 66? And we've invested a lot of money. By the way, whenever we get money from the state, we have to match it with non-state money, whether it's to invest or for services. So Jumpstart today, our budget this year is about 30 million between investing and services, and 40% of it is self-funded because of our business model and the way we're able to generate returns and kind of do this work. So we're excited that we invested 70 million in 16 years. Now we're going to invest 70 million in 4 years. And hopefully in another 3 to 4 years, we'll have 140 million to invest. And then another 3 to 4 years, hopefully we'll have over 200 million to invest. Because one of the challenges of the venture capital world and the entrepreneurship world in general is it builds on your last success. Most venture funds, for-profit venture funds, start at 10 to 20 million. Those investments, if they go well, then they raise a $40 million fund. They typically double every 3 to 4 years. The team that's running a venture fund typically doubles. And so in Jumpstart's case, again, because, one thing that people might find valuable, I know I did early in my time at Jumpstart, was I could not figure out why did the community, why did Dick Pogue, why did Sandy Cutler, why did Dave Dabrico, why did, the who's who of Cleveland demand that this entity be a nonprofit? Because I'm like, I'm a for-profit guy. I think we want to make money. This has got to be sustainable. And they demanded it was a nonprofit because of their experience with Primus. Does anybody in the room know the word Primus? Primus was a fund that the corporate community of Cleveland raised $30 million for in 1987. They were the founding investor in Steris. And Primus started here in Cleveland with the goal and objective that that fund would focus on investing in tech startups in Cleveland. Take a guess what happened after Fund 2, Fund 3. Primus continued to go where it was easier to generate the greatest profits. So they got out of venture capital altogether. Like by Fund 3, they're in private equity. We're only going to invest in companies that have, 50 million in revenue and 5 million in, they're not going to invest where it's the riskiest. They were going to invest in where it's the easiest. That's what any capitalist would do, right? If you're trying to maximize shareholder returns or whatever, you'd go to where it's easier and more profitable. So Jumpstart's blessing and curse and the daily issue and challenge for me is you're anchored where it's broken. And the organization is not allowed to move as a nonprofit to where it's easier. Now, of course, we're cheating a little bit because now we're raising these for-profit funds. But another real catalyst to that is the returns of those for-profit funds is going back to Jumpstart. So that is a catalyst. So let me just, I've been given the 5-minute sign, so let me just kind of wrap up and talk about a few things that have happened in the last 18 months in summary. COVID. I described it a little bit earlier. It's created kind of a barbell reality for Jumpstart, meaning there's companies that are doing incredibly well because of COVID, and there's companies who have gone out of business because of COVID. And there's way, way, way more doing incredibly well than I would have ever guessed. As a frame of reference, for the last, 5 to 10 years, the average amount of venture capital raised by tech startups in Ohio was around $1 billion to $1.2 billion. Tech startups in Ohio have raised $2 billion in the last 4 months. We'll probably end up raising about $4 billion this year in Ohio. Because basically, since the world has been rocked to the degree that it has, and the stock market has continued to stay as strong as it has, the amount of liquidity in the market is just off the charts. And of course, tech startups aren't going public the way they used to. So they're staying private now for 10, 15 years. So we have companies, we'll have companies in our portfolio doing 8 to 10 million in revenue, never made a profit, raising 30, 40, $50 million venture rounds on a $250 million pre-money valuation. That's happening in Cleveland right now. So it's bizarre. 16 months ago, 18 months ago, we had no idea what we were going to be facing. We knew, and we ended up being involved in hundreds of companies, taking them through PPP on the small business side, and some on the tech side, but most on the small business side. So that's kind of, COVID's been fascinating. It's been way more positive than we thought it would have been. And then the last thing I'll share about Jumpstart's future, and we have a brand new community report that just got finished yesterday that we're going to be publishing here in the next few weeks. And that community report also includes our new mission statement. So Jumpstart's changed its mission statement 4 times in 17 years. And what the mission statement says now is it's basically to fully unlock entrepreneurship to economically transform entire communities. So Jumpstart's mission is to fully unlock entrepreneurship, not tech entrepreneurs, not small businesses alone, but entrepreneurship. You might be wondering, why would you choose that word versus the words you've used in the past? And what I'll close with is one of the things that Jumpstart has learned, too late, but have learned, eventually we've learned, and that is, if we don't get the corporations and institutions more engaged and involved in commercialization, innovation, and entrepreneurship, Northeast Ohio has even greater challenges. In our peer regions across the country that are thriving and doing well, those regions, the entrepreneurial and economic and innovation ecosystem is being driven by the large corporations and the institutions, not little old Jumpstarts. It's the Cleveland Clinic. It's Progressive. It's the big companies in Pittsburgh, Indianapolis, Columbus, Cincinnati, Nashville, that are driving the innovation and entrepreneurship ecosystem. So Jumpstart now is spending a lot of time with corporations in Northern Ohio and institutions. Case, the Cleveland Clinic, we just announced a fund in partnership with university hospitals, because Jumpstart has been so focused on the entrepreneur, and we still spend 80% of our time and energy with entrepreneurs. But if you're only working with entrepreneurs, you're really not tapping into all the innovation, all the economic development potential in a region the size of Northeast Ohio. So again, the next 3 years, huge focus on entrepreneurship more broadly, a big focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm proud of our customers. Over 70% of our customers or clients are female. Over half are Black and Hispanic. And we have great numbers on the investing side, also with women, Black and Latinx, Hispanic, Latina entrepreneurs. And we're really excited about the new $70 million and the greater impact that we can make. So I'll wrap up with there. I didn't get to the student side of things, so maybe there can be some questions on related to students.
We have some time for questions and answers, right? So a little bit of time for Q&A. So fire away.
I'm curious, what do you think needs to be taught in entrepreneurship programs to help create that entrepreneurial mindset?
Problem solving 101, critical thinking is case studies. Certainly huge value if you can find the right partners, huge value in internships, co-ops, experiential learning. Creative thinking now, I never used to be as such a big advocate for creative thinking, and some of that is obviously critical thinking. The skills, I'm a finance accounting undergrad, right? So those skills are really important for entrepreneurship, obviously. And those are the fundamentals, but maybe in the last third of the curriculum in the coursework, you really focus on the human experience. Another one, it can't be understated, and, it's just leadership. What it means to be a servant leader, what it means to, particularly in hard times, tough times, which, case studies can be helpful too. But, I've been in business for 35 years now, and it's remarkable to me how people oftentimes can make all the difference. It's not how smart you are, it's not who you know, it's your character, your insight, your energy, your ability to collaborate, and I think that's only going to accelerate. The world has changed forever. None of us really know what how COVID, all the impacts of COVID, but I do believe, business has changed forever, and so that's going to require even more of these skills and more flexibility. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, when you started and even now, how did
How do we choose which businesses to invest in?
Like which criteria?
Oh, criteria. Okay, so if you're in Cleveland in 2004, if you're investing $3 to $6 million a year in tech companies, all the tech companies will know you because there was no one doing that. So, we would throw events, and we did networking, and we did networking events, and now we do a big event every year called Startup Scale Up that has 2,000 entrepreneurs that come to it, or at least we did in 2019. We didn't do it in 2020. We're contemplating, or 2021. So there is an entrepreneurial ecosystem out there that is, Google it. Venture Capital Cleveland, you're going to see Jumpstart. It's pretty easy to try to connect to those things. In terms of criteria, it's like a lot of things in life. The criteria, he who has the gold or she who has the gold makes the rules. So when it was the state of Ohio, if we're taking the gold or the money from the state of Ohio and matching it, what they're looking for are companies that can raise a huge, the greatest amount possible of follow-on funding after our initial investment. and or who can create the greatest number of jobs, and or who can generate the greatest amount of revenue. So for the state of Ohio, they gave us the money as a grant or as a loan. So they're not doing it to make money. They're doing it for their money to be an economic catalyst to what comes after. If we're investing for-profit money, it's profit. So as an example, give you a good example. So let's say we meet a biotech engineer who's wants to create a new drug. And it's going to cost hundreds of millions of dollars to develop that drug. Jumpstart's got a check for $250,000. Why would Jumpstart invest $250,000 in a company that's going to need hundreds of millions of dollars to take their product to market? Because the state of Ohio says that's the number one criteria. We want our money to be a catalyst to help an entrepreneur who can then go on and raise a lot more money, because we believe that it's other people's money, not the state's. It's other people's money who's going to generate the economic outcomes. Whereas on the for-profit side, Jumpstart wouldn't invest in that company, because the odds of us owning a material stake in that company are next to nothing, because $500,000 on a company that's going to have to raise $50 million, in the first step doesn't make sense for us to do. So it depends. Jumpstart just formed a fund with university hospitals. We did it together, and that investment thesis is, what is a problem or solution that'll dramatically impact the operations of UH? So the investment thesis of the fund is really what informs or creates the criteria that we then run a process in order to determine or discern what's a good fit based on that investment thesis. So it can change and evolve depending on where the money's coming from. Yeah.
Not necessarily an easy question to answer. We talked about tech startups, non-tech startups. How does Jumpstart define what it means to be an entrepreneur? We have many different entrepreneurs, many different industries in this room alone. What's a simple definition so that more people can relate to, connect to an entrepreneur?
A business leader that has ambition. That's it. So we're looking for business leaders that have ambition to grow. Whether that's a lawn care business that wants to go from 2 to 12, or it's a software as a service business that wants to go from 30 to 300, both are equally relevant and all have a role to play. And Jumpstart is either directly or through our funding of another organization with our own money, or we're us being a conduit of other people's money to those entities. So it's really around growth, ambition. And when we say growth, most of the time it comes down to jobs. As an economic development organization, where the rubber hits the road is this activity going to increase the wages of a person in our community, and or will it create or retain jobs? So that is the most practical currency from an economic development. And, oh, by the way, now, 17 years into this thing, just the work that Jumpstart directly provides and facilitates generates more than $1 billion of economic impact each year. So the companies that we helped in 2020 generated $350 million in income tax in Ohio in 2020 during COVID. So if you do this long enough and you're building on top, building on your success and building on your learnings, the state support for Jumpstart in 2000 and all our partners was probably totaled $16 million in 2020, and it generated, $300 million in income tax. And some of that money came to us as loans, like half of that came as a loan. So only $8 million of it was a grant, and this is not just to us, but to the other entities we're supporting. Every one of those entities has to match that money. So there's no free ride. It's not like people are just standing there at the door waiting for money from the state. They have to match the state grants at least 1-to-1, cash on cash. There's no in kind. It's got to be cash. And in some programs, it's as much as 3-to-1. So what's been nice about the Third Frontier and this program is that the Third Frontier's goals and objectives are broad enough that leaders in Toledo and Chillicothe and Columbus in Cleveland and Akron can figure out how to use the money in a way that makes sense for their economy, and of course is backed by local supporters, because you can't get the state money if you don't have someone else. It doesn't have to be local. You could have federal money that you're matching it with. Any money other than state money counts as match.
We're thinking about the early 2000s and branding of Jumpstart Cleveland as tech. I'm thinking back to follow-on funding, very little venture. Morgan Taylor is probably the only one in town.
Yep.
You know, how much the effort was, you know, making Cleveland real. And I remember the influx of VCs coming from Pittsburgh. What was that like? You know, was that, you know, what are you guys trying to do in Cleveland? What was that challenge like? How much of your effort was spent, you know, getting the message to the follow-on funders that, you know, Cleveland is real, Cleveland is tech?
Yeah, you know, well, first, still today, 86% of the venture capital industry is in 5 states. So Ohio, even with the incredible year, record-breaking year we're going to have, we're still only going to be 1% of the total industry, even though we're going to maybe be up 4 times what we typically would be. So having said that, the upper Midwest is continued to get stronger and stronger. There are more coastal investors investing in Northeast Ohio and Midwest companies. Probably the most important dynamic or the most important outcome for Ohio and for the upper Midwest in venture capital is a firm called Drive Capital in Columbus. And I call out Drive because they were founded in 2013 by 2 guys that used to work at Sequoia. So one grew up in Cincinnati but had been in California for 15, 20 years. The other person is a Californian who came to Ohio to work for Governor Kasich. And those 2 individuals, Mark Kwame and Chris Olson, founded Drive Capital in Columbus. And their first fund was a $250 million fund. And they're from Sequoia, so they're like from the creme de la creme venture firm in the world. They happen to be in Columbus. They had an incredibly difficult time raising their first $250 million. Took them about a year and a half, but they were successful. And they started investing at Series A stage companies across the upper Midwest, including 3 companies that are connected to Jumpstart, meaning Jumpstart was a founding investor or a partner in those companies early on. One of them is Path Robotics. Path Robotics is going to be a huge winner out of Case. But with that $250 million, they started investing Madison, Wisconsin, Baltimore, Cleveland, Ann Arbor, Chicago, and now Drive has $1.2 billion. Remember me talking about the doubling every 4 years? So they started at $250 million. They today have $1.2 billion under management, and they're about ready to close their next fund. So it was like $250 and then $400 and then like a $350. So their next fund is going to be really big. And the reason why that firm is so important to Ohio and to our work is it's proving out a new investment thesis. It's proving out that you can be headquartered in Cleveland or in Columbus, Midwest. You can invest in Series A companies raising 10 to 15 million, let's say, or 5 to 15 million. Those companies can generate a lot of progress. You can attract a ton of capital to those companies as well from the coast. But the real punch line at the end of the day for Jumpstart is, while it's true that Drive invested in almost 0 Columbus companies, today there's 9 companies that used to be in other places that are in Columbus that employ 3,000 people on their way to 6,000 in another 3 years. So this idea of a magnet, you know, ultimately, I think your question is, you know, this is a generational, Cleveland in 1890 was one hell of a magnet. 350 millionaires in the city of Cleveland in 1895. Why? Rockefeller. You know, the Bill Gates of that era. So that success, that progress was a catalyst, and Northeast Ohio has really struggled to find, outside of healthcare, obviously healthcare has been a huge catalyst, it's created a lot of jobs, but it's not created hundreds of thousands of new jobs in Cleveland in the last 5 years, 10 years, but it's created a lot of meaningful jobs. You know what, healthcare is probably 180,000 to 200,000 jobs just in the 5-county region when it's all said and done. But this idea of the recreation, creating companies, and being able to attract them. That's one thing that's interesting too in Drive's case. And we're aspiring to mimic this in Cleveland, and that is for that first check, it doesn't really matter it's not as important where the company is. But when that company's raising a B round, a 10, 15, 20, $25 million B round, particularly if it's in an industry that you have a correlation, like Drive's had a ton of success in insurtech, in fintech. So Columbus is now is a very, very significant center in and around financial services with insurance in particular. They also have other strengths too, of course, but right now, half. So in just a little frame of reference, in 2017, a company founded in Twinsburg called Cover My Meds, Jumpstart was the founding investor in that business, was the first unicorn in the state of Ohio. The first tech unicorn ever in the state of Ohio was bought by McKesson for $1.5 billion in 2017. Today, there's 11 unicorns in Ohio. And a lot of it has to do with Drive. Because when that company was raising the big Series B or Series C round, Drive said, if you want our check for $20 million, you got to move to Columbus. So, he or she who has the gold gets to make the rules. That is really, I think, kind of what's next up for my work, Jumpstart's work in Northeast Ohio, is to have a fund that has that kind of market power, headquartered here, that can achieve those kinds of goals in the next decade. And by the way, I think that didn't happen overnight. Drive's been around for 9 years. And now it's just really starting to make that impact, because you're not going to make that kind of impact typically with a first check, unless you get lucky. You could get lucky, and that's always a good thing. But so there's a strategy, yeah.
Could you elaborate on dwindling resources?
Yeah, sorry. State of Ohio right now has $3.8 billion in ARPA money, American Rescue Plan money. They have $300 million available for micro businesses right now. So the irony is we've never, at least, I'm 55. I've never been in a scenario in my life where there is so much money available in the public coffers as there is already, but they haven't figured out what to do with it yet. So, just in northern Ohio, not including Columbus, there's $2 billion sitting in the bank accounts of local government as a result of ARPA. So I spend a lot of my time working with county executives and commissioners and mayors, helping them think about how they can, could, and should be deploying a percentage of those resources to help small business. And I would say in general, it's about 15%. Like if you said, because obviously they got to solve for budget deficits and infrastructure and medical stuff and healthcare, there's a lot of things to solve for. But I'd say in general, a lot of leaders in the community, and by the way, this money doesn't require match. So it's like, we're all paying for it, right? So it's not free money. The taxpayers are going to ultimately, the U.S. taxpayer is going to have to foot the bill for this. But in the near term, it's going to be fascinating to see where these resources go, how they're deployed, what kind of businesses are they focused on. Having said that, I think the other element of dwindling resources is workforce. The biggest issue by far in our region, our state, and the country is workforce. And the good news is for the students at John Carroll, they're going to have one hell of a career, because they're going to be, the talent problem our country is about ready to face is like nothing we've ever imagined. And if you think the talent problem is hard in Cleveland, look at a larger region like Chicago. The boomers, 11,000 boomers leaving the workforce every day is creating a massive hole in the economy. So I think it's likely that a lot of the American Rescue Plan money is going to be focused on workforce. what are the industries looking to hire new people? What are the skill sets those people need? How can government, philanthropy, play as an intermediary to try to solve those issues and problems? So, and then kind of another wrinkle is, which irony to some degree, is dwindling resources. Like right now, if I have a $10 million company and I call 15 venture capitalists, I could probably get a check for $50 million. So it's actually to the other extreme. I shouldn't be able to raise that amount of money at the valuation I'll be able to raise it at. But, and I don't know whether this bubble bursts in a month or 6 months or 24 months. My guess is it's at least 18 months. So, that's probably not the answer maybe not the answer you expected, but I think I guess ultimately what Jumpstart is a lot about is really kind of comes down to 3 things, and one thing maybe I haven't emphasized enough, and that is capital is important, services, knowledge is important, but the third thing that's incredibly important is connections. It's like if you are a struggling business and you have a particular problem, who are the half a dozen people you need to connect to that can help solve the problem, or at least inform you strategically and directionally on how to address the resource gap. And that's a huge part of what Jumpstart does. I mean, obviously we're only investing in 34, maybe 50 companies a year. We're coaching 2,000 a year. So, it's a very, very small number, and maybe providing loans to either with our money or someone else's money, another 30, 40, 50 companies. Because we do provide capital to traditional small businesses. It's loans. We're not owning a piece of the company, but we do some of that as well. So, happy to anyone that, has a specific problem or challenge that they might want or need help on, email me and, I'll get right back to you. Someone on our team will get back to you with the way we would think about trying to solve that challenge.
All right. Thank you, Rick. So thank you for coming. Couple things. One, if you haven't already on the way out, grab one of these flyers we have. So over the course of the academic year, we function on an academic year. Over the course of the academic year, we got about 17 events so far, and there may be a few extra we throw in over time. We got a variety of things from folks like Ray and others in the community, some educational stuff, some kind of how I did it, from entrepreneurs, some beer tasting at Winking Lizard, right? Some fun, some educational. So you're welcome to these. Check that out. My contact information is on the flyer as well. If you have questions or thoughts or ideas or concerns or anything like that, I'm always happy to jump on a call or meet you up for coffee or cupcakes or whatever it is we want to do. So thank you very much for coming. I hope you enjoyed that. We'll have a video that we'll share of this in case you'd like that for future use. And have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, Alan.